We're here to talk about navigating climate information for effective policymaking. Good afternoon, and welcome to our first in-person briefing of 2025. I'm Dan Brissett. I'm the president of the Environmental and Energy Study Institute. Today kicks off our Congressional Climate Camp briefing series, and we're starting with this session today. I'd like to say big thanks to Representative Paul Tonko and his great staff for their help with arranging the room today. EESI was founded by a bipartisan group of members of Congress, and since 1984, we have worked to provide science-based information about environmental, energy, and climate change topics to policymakers and the public. We try really hard to ensure that our briefings are timely, our resources are timely, relevant, accessible, and practical. We put a lot of thought into our resources to always be science-based and ready when congressional staff need the information, or even before you know you need the information. What does this look like? Well, a lot of it is briefings, but we do a lot of other stuff as well. And so I'd encourage everyone to subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter, Climate Change Solutions, to keep up with all of our articles and fact sheets as well as our briefings. This is actually our third set of Congressional Climate Camp briefings. And this early in the year, of course, there's a lot of change and transition as new members are getting situated and new staff are eager to dig in and get to work. In addition to having lots and lots of meetings on Capitol Hill to introduce ourselves and our resources and sending lots and lots of emails, these briefings like this, are a great way to bring important information to Capitol Hill. In addition to the topic for today, we will host a briefing on February 13th about understanding the budget and appropriations process. Not sure that could be any more timely given the news of late, but it's going to be a really excellent briefing with tremendous panelists. This plug needs a bit of a programming note, and that is this is a new date and time. We're actually accelerating this briefing and moving it a little bit ahead in our schedule. So please note that in your calendar. If you've already RSVP'd, just make sure you're tracking the updated date and time. And if you haven't RSVP'd yet, well, come on. You should take care of that ASAP because it's going to be a really good one. That briefing will be at 3 p.m. on February 13th in this very room, the Gold Room. We also have a lot of other things in the works, and like I said, the best way to keep up with everything is to subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter, Climate Change Solutions. Today we are setting the stage for our policymaker educational programming with a look at the drivers of climate change and the latest deployable solutions to address the many challenges we face. Thanks in advance to our great panelists. They are going to help us discuss climate concepts and terminology from the different greenhouse gases we emit to different renewable energy technologies, to help you identify policy solutions at the intersection of these areas. It'll be a really good one. It's a little bit more interactive than we usually do, and I'm so eager to get started. But I have two last things to talk about. One, we will have a question and answer period after our panel. We'll take questions from our online audience, and I know there's a lot of people in our online audience today. Thank you for that. Send us an email, and the email address to use is ask, that's ASK, @EESI.org. Also follow us on social media at EESI Online. We'll be doing real-time coverage on our Instagram story and on Blue Sky. Also, if you have questions we don't get to today, me and my colleagues, we're all wearing our lapel pins. Please come up and talk to us. We'd love to meet you and get to know what you're working on and your bosses are working on. And we'll do our best to follow up with you and make sure that you all get the right answers, and not the right answers, but the right answers, and links to our different resources and things like that you might want. Also, we'll be doing a survey at different points throughout the session today. So if you take a moment, if you use our QR code, you can share with us your feedback of the session. We're always looking for ideas and future briefing topics and things like that. So we'll put that at the end of the briefing too if you want to wait till the briefing before you comment on it. If you just want to do it now and say it's great, you're welcome to do that, but giving you options. So we have three tremendous speakers, and the first of them is Bernadette Placky. Bernadette is the Vice President of Engagement for Climate Matters, the Director and Chief Meteorologist for Climate Central. Bernadette is dedicated to helping the public understand the importance of climate change science, impacts, and solutions. Bernadette developed partnerships with media organizations, nonprofits, and academic institutions, and leads a team that creates weekly reporting resources for a large and growing network of media professionals. No doubt you've seen some of their work, and serves as an expert on the links between climate change and the weather. Bernadette previously worked for more than a decade as a TV meteorologist when she won an Emmy for Best Weathercaster. She's been elected to the American Meteorological Society Council, National Academy Board of Atmospheric Science and Climate, and chairs the Penn State Meteorology and Atmospheric Science Advisory Committee. And I think I have to say go Birds as I welcome you to the stage today. So Bernadette, I'll welcome you to the lectern. I'm literally looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, we were already talking football. So thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it. We're going to get into the science of what's going on with climate change. As a quick overview, I will have my information at the end. You are most welcome to follow up. We can go in many different directions and go deeper if you're interested. So to get started, Climate Central, we're a nonprofit research and communication organization. We are non-policy and we are non-advocacy. We're really about science for communication purposes, and that's how we are trying to drive change with climate change. So before we even get into the science, one thing I wanted to do in our prep conversations and in general conversations leading up to this week, to me, the thing that stands out the most when it comes to misconceptions and miscommunication and misunderstanding around climate change is what people think about this. And before we can even move forward with any conversation about climate change, this is really important in grounding this conversation for today. So this is research that's done twice a year from our friends at Yale and George Mason University, and it's called Climate Change of the American Mind. And there's a lot of consistency in what you see on the right-hand side here, but the left-hand side, those bubbles have grown over time. And this is how, when we look at the American public, our views fall on climate change. You see, overwhelmingly, most people are alarmed or concerned. Sometimes they don't know what climate change means for them specifically or what they can do, but they know something's going on and they know that we need to do more. All the way on the right, the dismissive, that 11%, that is the group that has a really, really loud voice and is driving a lot of this conversation, but it's only about 10% of our population. So as we engage in this topic today, just want people to understand that most people genuinely care about this, want to do more, but they constantly think people don't care about it, and that's why they don't engage in these conversations. Take a look at this. That data is distributed around the country, and when you drop below those oranges, in the blues, that's when you get below 50%. And there are very few counties in the entire United States that drop below 50%. And you can go here and you can see across the top there, those all the different ways that these have been cut for the data. Also along that top select question, there are about 28 questions that they've tracked over time. So you can really dig in and explore more here. But I thought this was really critical because it's not as divisive as you think as far as knowledge and understanding of this topic. Now, where we start to see some changes, those numbers drop off around human causation and understanding that scientists actually understand this, but where we see these numbers jump tremendously, and I thought this was important for today, is that the public actually supports regulations of carbon dioxide as a pollutant. Percent of adults who support tax rebates for people to purchase energy-efficient vehicles or solar panels. People love renewable energy. Look at this. 79% is the national average. You can see there's a lot of dark oranges and reds. So this is where the American public stands on this issue and some of their thoughts. Now, why we're here today is to help fill some of those gaps in what we know, why it matters, and what we can do about it. So how do we know? Well, the real basics of climate change are not that complicated. It comes back to the greenhouse effect. This is science from the 1800s that's well understood and not challenged. We understand what greenhouse gases are, and they've been in our atmosphere since we've been around. Now, the thing that's happening recently over the past 100, 200, 300 years is that we are increasing the number of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And the primary greenhouse gases that are leading to the warming are carbon dioxide, overwhelmingly the biggest. And it's important because it half-lives, but it stays in our atmosphere for so long, for some version for hundreds, even thousands of years. Now, methane is a critical one too, because it doesn't last as long, but it's way more powerful in the short term. So it has a huge warming potential in the short term. And the other thing too is when we track carbon dioxide and go back, we've had ups and downs before, absolutely. But in a climate record of minimum 800,000 years, a lot of people have pushed this possibly a couple million years, but in this data set here, we've seen some ups and downs, but we've never seen anything like we're seeing today when humans have established life the way we know on this planet. And it's not just the high number, but it's that pace of change. And that's what's so critical, because we can adapt to changes if we have time, but when we're pushing that ability to adapt by this speed of how much we're putting in our atmosphere, that really limits what we can do to stay safe and prepared. And the thing is, we can track this in many different ways. We can go back and reconstruct our past climate data sets through a version of different things. There's air bubbles that are trapped in the ice for hundreds of thousands of years that we take out in our ice cores, or tree rings. We also can go down to the bottoms of the oceans and lakes and get sediment samples. And we can track what our atmosphere was like for hundreds of thousands of years ago. And we also know, as we measure the amounts today, we know where they're coming from. And I've called this out somewhat separately because the US emission sector and the global emission sector are a little bit different here. And I want to call out that in the United States, our biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions are transportation sector. Now that is different globally because in the US, we drive really big things really far, whereas when you go globally, we are wiping out some rainforests in Indonesia and in Brazil. And so that's why you see some of those changes with our ag and land use numbers versus transportation numbers when you talk about the US versus global. And this is all information that came from our government sources, and we'll have these slides for you. So I see some people taking some frantic notes. So why does this matter? Well, this is why it matters, because when you add more greenhouse gases, they warm things. Again, science that goes back to the 1800s here. Last year, warmest year on record. We talk about Fahrenheit here in the US. Globally, the conversation is around Celsius, and there's a goal of 1.5 Celsius. That equates to about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit on average there. And last year, in a one-year spike, we hit it. The thing is, when we talk about that 1.5, which my colleague here is going to do a little bit more on, that's for an average of 20 to 30 years. So this one spike showed us where we're going unless we make some changes. And we saw the consequences with that extra warming. And what's a degree, right? I mean, we have a few degrees a day, but it puts us in a whole new climate zone. Look at how much more red is here. You still get cold, right? It still happens, but there's so much more red that happens when you shift into a whole new climate zone. And this is how that translates on the human scale. So let's take Grand Rapids, for instance. When we forecast out to the end of the century, if we continue on this path, summers in Grand Rapids are going to feel like Memphis. That's what a couple of degrees does. It shifts us into a whole new space that our agriculture is not ready for, our infrastructure is not ready for, our human systems are just not ready for. And this plays out in different ways all around the country and the world. Phoenix, 2 more weeks at 110 or hotter. I don't care if it's a dry heat, that is hot. As far as humid heat, almost a month more of humid heat in Baton Rouge. And this is already happening. And there's less cold. Some people might say they like that. I like the cold, but not everyone does. I get that. The thing is, though, the reason it's big news is because it doesn't happen so much anymore. This cold we just dealt with didn't set that many records. It was cold, yes. That's why it was news, because we don't get it as much. Our cold's just not as cold as it used to be, and it doesn't last as long. Now, we can track this through one of our tools, and we'll have this link for you too. It's the Climate Shift Index. Science has advanced to a point where we can actually go into individual weather events and individual temperatures and quantify the role of climate change within those. That's called attribution science. It's a branch of climate science. It's really fascinating if you like science, and we could do a whole briefing on that. But this is just a snapshot from today, where we're seeing temperatures that are made more likely because of climate change. And when you add more heat to our atmosphere, we are a water planet. So what happens is you force more evaporation. It's kind of like a boiling pot of water, right? And when we evaporate and add that extra heat, it's drying out our land more quickly, and it's giving a higher risk for wildfire weather days when it's dry, hot, and windy. And we're seeing this. We have local data around the United States for this increase in fire weather days. Now, on the opposite side of that water cycle, with more water in the atmosphere, when there is a trigger to come down, whether it's a storm or a cold front or your general climate is a wetter climate, we see more of that rain coming down in humongous amounts that are overwhelming our systems. And the biggest increases are here in the United States, in the Northeast, and then you see the Midwest. But even places getting drier, our shift in when and how we get that water is coming down toward, you get less overall, but when it comes, it's coming in these big buckets and it's leading to flooding. So it can get tricky, but it's really supercharging the water cycle. Now, that's when we talk about the atmosphere. Most of our heat is going into the oceans. Over 90% goes into the oceans. I mean, that's an extraordinary number. So that's really changing things, and we're only beginning to learn what that really means. When it comes to storms, it's supercharging our storms. Warmer water leads to more fuel. So when we get a system, whether it's a hurricane, a tropical system, even a nor'easter, and it goes over water, it becomes more explosive faster. That's a huge risk issue because if you're talking about tropical systems, you're in Florida, you're preparing for a Category 2 storm, overnight becomes a 5. It's a big difference in what you have to prepare for to keep people safe and prepared. Also, when these storms come on shore, they come with heavier rain and a higher storm surge from our rising seas. So another thing with that attribution science, we've applied those methodologies to ocean temperatures. And here's Helene, for example. This is one that still hits home to a lot of people and will for a while. This storm went through rapid intensification, that explosion really of the storm, over water that was 300 to 500 times more likely because of climate change. And this is all documented with published methodologies on our website. Now, with more warm water, we're seeing an immense amount of sea level rise, even outside of storms. And the thing is, that's showing up in flooding of roads all around our country on sunny days. So even if it's not the building itself going underwater, the road to get to the building. And that is dramatically affecting a lot of the things that we need to use to get to our work, to get to school, to get to the hospital. We do have a really robust sea level program at Climate Central too, and all of that data is on this website here. You can explore what will be underwater by different times. So putting this all together in a few different things. All that heating hits us in a lot of different ways, not just weather. It's dramatically affecting our health already. We're seeing more mosquito days. We're seeing diseases with mosquitoes coming in from places that we're not used to. Also, longer, stronger allergy seasons, worse wildfire smoke. It is already costing us more money. This is documented. This is NOAA data here. And we're seeing these numbers off the charts. Plus, in different ways locally, we're seeing cooling demand up, power outages. It's affecting some of our favorite things like beer, coffee, wine, and our football seasons. Go Birds. So this is a summary of everything that's being affected by this. And you see, it's pretty much everything. All the things that your audiences care about, sadly, has a climate connection. If we care about the economy, there's a climate connection. If we care about migration, there's a climate connection. If we care about national security, there's a climate connection. So this is our atmosphere. This is what differentiates us from the rest of anything that we know with life in the world. And it's up to us what we want to do with our future. And the choice is really ours because we know what we need to do. And we've done big things before. So I'm just going to leave this with you. We've got a bunch of resources. I showed a couple. All of the graphics I use are part of our Climate Matters program. That's the link. Plus, I'm going to show you my email so you can email me. We can get you signed up for this information. We also have a weather power tool because weather's not only part of the problem, it's part of the solution, wind and solar. And that's my information if you want to get in touch.
Panelists are opting to sit there today so they can experience each other's presentations. So that's why I sat there, because I learned pretty quickly. That was great. And Bernadette mentioned that the slides will be posted. The slides will, in fact, be posted online for all of our panelists, as well as other resources and materials. And while you're there, check out our website. We've got lots of great resources about pretty much anything you might want to learn about. So that brings us to our second panelist of the day. Anand Patwardhan is a professor at the University of Maryland, College Park, go Terps, and a senior fellow for its Center for Global Sustainability. Anand's research focuses on vulnerability and adaptation to climate change, as well as broader issues of science, technology, and innovation policy and sustainable development. Anand has been a coordinating lead author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and a member of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel of the Global Environment Facility. Currently serves as co-chair of the Science Committee of the World Adaptation Science Program, co-chair of the Adaptation Research Alliance, and co-lead of the Methodology Advisory Group for the Race to Resilience. And the next time someone introduces you, you'll be able to say EESI panelist, the most important qualification of all. So Anand, welcome to the briefing today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Dan. Great to be here. And this is really a perfect segue because Bernadette just told you all about the state of climate and why it matters. And I'm just going to add a little bit of a word there called action, which is really shifting gears a little bit from what's happening to our climate and why it matters to what are we doing about it. And so my focus will be much more at the global scale. And hopefully, what I can do in the next 10 to 12 minutes before I get booted off the stage is, is go through all of this stuff, go through emissions, mitigation, adaptation. Those are the two primary responses to climate that we see. And then I'll try to leave you with some key takeaways if that's all I want to leave you with. But as Dan said, these slides are available and you have my contact information there. Welcome any questions you might have. What I'm going to do today is draw from a number of well-established sources. They're all there in the presentation, both from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but also from UNEP's United Nations Environment Program. They bring out every year a emissions gap report and an adaptation gap report that sort of tracks the state of action. So these are all resources that you have access to through the presentation. Bernadette showed you a slide which showed you that steep climb of carbon dioxide concentrations in the last century and a half. And this is just the same thing, but over a much shorter period of time. And you can see that atmospheric CO2 concentration continues to increase, and for good reason, because global emissions continue to increase. And what this shows you is emissions both from land use change, that is, there's a big bar of uncertainty because land use emissions are more uncertain, and emissions from fossil carbon. And you can see that there's been a continued steady increase in these emissions. Let's look a little bit more at fossil fuel emissions. Fossil fuel emissions and fossil CO2 emissions continue to increase. You can actually see the effects of COVID and the financial crisis, but they were very short-lived, right? So you see a little blip, and then we are back on track. The increase has slowed in the recent decade, but it has not peaked. So you can see that emissions are still rising quite steadily. Let's break that down a little bit more from global to individual countries. A big shift really over the last 2 decades has been, of course, as we all know, the rapid growth of China. And China is by far the largest emitter today, followed, of course, still by the US, the EU, Russia, and Japan. These top 6 emitters account for 68% of global emissions. So that's where the action lies. And if you take the G20, which is our favorite grouping of countries globally, that's 80% of global emissions. So really, if you want to think about it, if you want to solve the climate problem, it's really a G20 problem, and you're done, right? So it's not a problem in Malawi or in Timor-Leste or wherever it is. But the picture does look a little bit different if you go from total to per capita, and this is one of the sources of debate and often disagreement in the UNFCCC in the climate negotiations. When you look at per capita, the US is still the largest, but China is again catching up rapidly. It has actually passed the EU in terms of per capita emissions. India falls down quite a bit in per capita terms, whereas in total emissions, India is obviously quite large. The other piece, which is, I think, again, worth reminding ourselves, is the whole story of climate is a story of cumulative emissions. It's not what we emit this year that matters, it's what we have emitted over time. It's the cumulative. And so when we look at cumulative, of course, historically, we have the US and the EU still the largest, but China is a very close third. Let me skip this. So that was this picture on emissions, sort of know where the emissions are taking place, where they are coming from, and where the action needs to be. The Paris Agreement defined something called the global stocktake, which was a process where every year, every 5 years, the world sits down and takes stock of what is happening in response to the Paris Agreement, which was 2015. And so if you look at the global stocktake, which just finished a year and a half ago, clearly the conclusions were that we are well off track, that emissions are not in line with where they should be if you want to meet the targets of the Paris Agreement. You need much more ambition in action and in support to make that action happen. And if you really wanted to get to net zero emissions, you will need to really transform systems, multiple systems, transportation systems, energy systems, and we'll see some of that in the next presentation to follow. And that a focus on just transitions is really important because there will be winners and there will be losers. And we've got to figure out how we address losers and how climate action makes sure that winners are more equitably distributed. So what's the gap? The gap is both in ambition and in action. There's a huge gap in the ambition that is needed. This is from the UNEP's emissions gap report. The two panels that you see at the bottom are the ranges that you need. That's what emissions need to look like if you want to either stay within 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. The top lines are where we are in terms of what pledges countries have made. So if you look at the pledges for 2030, there's a huge gap between what has been pledged and what needs to happen, and that's the emissions gap. Countries make pledges under the Paris Agreement for what they will do, both conditional on support and unconditional on support. Basic bottom line, there's a lot of information here, but basic bottom line is ambition is falling very short of where it needs to be. And what that means is ambition falls short, we are left with a future that is not in accordance with the 1.5 target, right? We are left with a future that is likely to be much warmer because there is both an ambition gap and also an actual implementation gap. So you might pledge something, but do you actually make sure that those pledges translate into reduction of emissions? So what are we looking at if you look at the current state of action on mitigation for the world in the future? Well, you're looking at a world that looks much warmer and with possibly a warming in the range of 2.5 to 2.7 degrees. If you take the current set of policies, of course, if countries actually take all of their net zero pledges that they have made and put them into action, then you might be able to still make the Paris target. So it is still technically feasible to bridge this emissions gap. The question is there political will and is there the implementation ability and the finance to make that actually happen? Right? So the total, there's certainly enough ability for us to still stay within the targets that the world adopted in Paris, but the question is, will that actually happen or not? And what that will take, critically, is it will take money. It will take a six-fold increase in investment in clean energy solutions more generally, and decarbonization if you really want to get to a 1.5 degree world. And that investment has to go across all sectors of the economy, in energy, in transport, in buildings, in agriculture, forestry, and land use, and also, of course, in industry. And so the question then becomes really a question of how does that money get generated? How does that finance get generated? Is it public? Is it private? How does private finance get incentivized? And that was a lot of the conversation these past years, and it's going to continue in the global arena, in the climate negotiations on where the financing is. And I'll talk a little bit of finance at the end. So on adaptation, I mentioned adaptation is critical because we are going to likely face a warmer world. We are already facing a warmer world at 1.3 to 1.5 degrees, and which is causing serious impacts, right? So in some ways, one key takeaway for me is how important adaptation is as a part of the policy agenda. And unfortunately, it has not seen the kind of attention that mitigation has seen. And not just in the US, everywhere globally. Adaptation action is limited. It is often very dispersed and not at the scale and at the urgency needed. Countries are undertaking national adaptation planning. So you see an increase in national adaptation plans and strategies across the world. So that's picking up steam. But implementation is lagging a lot, right? So actually taking those adaptation plans and converting them into action in cities, in communities, in sectors like water and agriculture and health is where the pace is really lacking. And that's really where, again, it comes to finance. One of the important steps forward in this last couple of years was the adoption of a framework for global climate resilience. There were global targets adopted. And so a big question now is will countries step up to actually reflect those adaptation targets in what they are doing and the actions that they are taking. Just as there's a finance gap on mitigation, there's an enormous finance gap on adaptation. The investment case, even though the economics of investing in adaptation are sound, the payoffs are great of investing in resilience. The problem is the finance doesn't follow the economics very often because it's seen as risky. It is not seen as something that generates tangible returns because even if you had investment, it's hard to monetize the returns that are coming in. And so there's a finance gap, a large finance gap for adaptation as well. So let me show you a little bit of what that landscape of climate finance looks like. Yes. This I do not expect you to read through, but just 4 key takeaways. Most climate finance is private, it is not public. So despite what you might hear, most of the money is still private money. Most of the climate finance is for mitigation and not adaptation. Most of the climate finance starts from developed countries and ends in developed countries. There's very little flow from developed to developing. And most of the climate finance is not grants. It's actually market finance. It's loans and equity. So just when someone talks about climate finance taking up a lot of public money, you might want to keep that in mind. So these are my final takeaways. And again, this material will be available to you. I think it's very clear that the global clean energy transition is well underway. And it has been for a while, actually, but it's just not fast enough. What matters are not just the emissions of today, but cumulative emissions. Avoiding emissions in the first place, much better than trying to remove them later. The reality is that achieving the Paris Agreement target of well below 2 degrees looks very unlikely at current levels of action and ambition. The likely warming is anywhere between 2.5 to 2.7 degrees, which means that adaptation and resilience are critical, but still lack attention and effort. There is a very large opportunity cost of inaction, but benefits of anticipatory action. And finally, there is a large finance gap for both mitigation and adaptation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anand. That was a great presentation. We have a couple of resources I just wanted to plug if anyone wants to sort of do a deeper dive into some of the topics that have come up so far. A year ago, our first briefing of 2024 was actually about the 5th National Climate Assessment. That was a really great briefing. It was in this room. If you want to learn a little bit more about what the NCA 5 said about where we stand in the United States, that would be a really great resource. We also, every year, every fall, during COP-tober, in the lead up to the UNFCCC negotiations, we sort of focus our efforts on that, and we do so from a congressional perspective, or try to do it from a congressional perspective. Last year, we did a series of briefings and other resources, but the briefings, one of them was about U.S.-China relations. So Anand talked a little bit about sort of where China and the U.S. are with some of those charts. We also did one on methane, on the global methane pledge. Bernadette mentioned methane emissions as a key source of global warming, so that would be a deep dive. And then also, if you want to just learn a little bit more, may feel a little bit less relevant these days with the Paris Agreement, but it's still, the rest of the world is still working on it. And so if you do want to do a deeper dive there, we had a briefing sort of specifically about the negotiations themselves. All of this will be available, and we also will, as a reminder, have a chance for online questions and in the room questions. So if you're in the room, we'll have a microphone. That'll be easy. If you're in our online audience, send us an email. The email address to use is ask, that's ask@eesi.org. So our first 2 presenters did a great job setting the stage. So we all are very smart now about sort of where things are. And that's perfectly teed up our next presenter, who is going to come at us with a really cool interactive presentation to help explain what do we do about all of this. So it's my pleasure to introduce Krystal Noiseux. Krystal is the Senior Associate Director for the MIT Climate Pathways Project at the MIT Climate Policy Center. Krystal's team uses interactive simulations and research insights to advance the adoption of evidence-based climate policy through leaders in the public and private sectors. Before MIT, she worked in environmental affairs for the state government of Rhode Island and the Harvard University Office for Sustainability. Krystal previously served on nonprofit boards, the Rhode Island Environmental Education Association and Rhode Island Food Policy Council, and currently serves on the advisory board of the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative. Krystal, welcome to the lectern. We are standing by if we need any help with the technology getting it set up, but I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
We're going to do a quick tech switch. I hope quick. Okay. All right. I love it when things work out. Okay. So to get us started here today, before I formally begin, I wanted to create a way for folks here in the audience today, as well as those that are live streaming the event, to participate in in today's session. So if you go to this QR code or you put in pollev.com/climate pathways into your browser, you should be able to access a poll. It's going to ask you to register for credit. Just say skip for now. It's going to ask you for your name. Say skip. Your answers will be anonymous. And you should be presented with a single question asking you, what climate policy solutions do you think will have the biggest impact in time to make a difference? You'll have a list there to choose from. I believe it'll let you choose up to 3. And keep that poll open during the session today, because you'll have the opportunity to change your answers as we move along through the presentation. Everyone able to successfully grab that? Thumbs up a couple thumbs up in the audience. Okay, that makes me feel better. Thank you. And I will pull it up for you a little bit later as well. So to get us started here, again, I'm Krystal Noiseux. I represent the MIT Climate Pathways Project, which is actually a collaborative effort between MIT's new Climate Policy Center, the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative, and the nonprofit Climate Interactive. And the mission of the new center, which was just established this summer, is to serve as a trusted and nonpartisan resource for policymakers who wish to advance evidence-based climate policy in the next decade. Dan did a great job saying what our mission statement is at the project, so we are leveraging interactive simulations towards that end of trying to advance evidence-based climate policy. And the interactive simulators that we use are called C-ROADS and En-ROADS. They're co-developed by Climate Interactive and MIT Sloan. So we are actually going to dive right in to the En-ROADS simulator today, and we're going to work in this together to try to build a collective scenario of success, which Anand was just talking about. So I'm going to jump right into the simulator now. En-ROADS is freely available online for you to use on your own and explore. You can run this in any laptop, browser, or tablet. When you land on the page, you can actually translate it into 21 different languages. This is a global climate policy simulator. Global meaning anything that we simulate here today, we're saying, what's the global average policy that we could implement, and how would that impact the entire world, right? So this isn't a US-specific model saying, if we do this in the US, this is what happened in the US. What if the world did this thing to this extent on average? Where would that get us? It is, again, co-developed between Climate Interactive and MIT Sloan. It's using the best available science, so we're using data sources like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the International Energy Agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the World Bank, the UN, and the latest peer-reviewed science. It is updated regularly. You'll always see a little version control in the corner, so every 1 or 2 months it's getting the latest data, it's getting new interface updates. And it's fully documented. So you can go right in the simulator, you can access the model's technical reference, you will see the entire structure of this model, you will see all the equations that we use, all the parameters, all the assumptions. It's fully online for you to see and explore, it's fully transparent. And as a user, you can even drive into the key assumptions behind this model, and you can explore them, you can challenge them, you can change them. So it's really important for us for this to also be a flexible tool to meet your needs. We also test this model against other models. There's big 6 integrated assessment models that are out there in the world that are often used by policymakers in this space. So we kind of feed the same inputs into our model as theirs and see how they do and use that to learn and make the model stronger. All models are wrong. Some models are helpful. We do this to make sure that our model remains helpful. And we also test it to the historic data. The model starts back in 1990, runs forward to the end of the century. So we have 30+ years of data that we can look at. We can say, what did the model say what was going to happen? What really happened? How did we do? How can we improve that modeling? What you're looking at here on the interface is what we call the En-ROADS baseline. And the baseline is a scenario of what would happen if the world took no further action on climate than it already has already today. So our model doesn't include any sort of pledges that countries are making or that Fortune 500 companies are making. It's really all about implemented policy, and the idea is for you to be able to explore what it would mean to take further action in different areas. When we look across the top here at what that baseline scenario is, we have to feed in some assumptions. So for example, we need to look at something like, how is the world's population going to grow over the next 100 years or through the end of the century? And so here we have the population lever at the bottom. If you look at the far ends of this lever, we're looking at the low-end growth projections or the high-end growth projections of the UN. And we just go in the middle. We go with that median growth projection. You as the user, now look at the graphs and look at the temperature, can swing these levers. Thousands of equations will go off in the back. You'll get immediate feedback for any of the assumptions that you change, any of the interventions that you make into the system. So we have to make assumptions about the population growth, future economic growth, future technological process. All of these things add up to this baseline. What you're seeing here in the top left are the global sources of primary energy. Every graph you see in En-ROADS, that horizontal axis is going to start at the year 2000 and run 100 years to 2100. So that's always going to be the bottom axis. Here we're looking at exajoules of energy around the world, and we're looking at a stacked graph of the growth of coal in brown. Above that, oil in red, gas in blue, the renewables, which are modeled separately but visually shown together here in green, bioenergy in pink, and there is a sliver of a baby blue up on top, which is nuclear. And we know that when we combust these fossil fuels, we generate this carbon dioxide. And so if we look over here at greenhouse gas net emissions, this is in gigatons of CO2 equivalent. So it puts all the different greenhouse gases into the same warming potential so that we can kind of compare apples to apples. And so you see this big gray area here represents that CO2 that is produced when we combust those fossil fuels, by far the largest driver of climate change. We also have in green here a driver from what we decide to do with land use change. And then we have other greenhouse gases that we have to think of as well. So we have fluorinated gases from industry, things that keep things cool, like refrigerators and air conditioners, things of that nature. We have methane. So methane's coming from agriculture, it's coming from waste, it's coming from industry, and then we have the nitrous oxide here also coming from both agriculture and industry. So you can see where those drivers are, and it's helpful to look back at this graph as we move through the simulation today to see where it is we need to focus our efforts. If this was the trajectory, we took no more action, this would put us at 6 degrees Fahrenheit of warming at the end of the century. And then if you think about the global climate goals, you can see the degrees in C here, smaller underneath, but I put Fahrenheit big up for you. You can look at both. I tend to look at the other one, but not today. And so what we want to do together today is we want to not accept that future for all of the reasons that my colleagues up here just explained. And we want to strive to get that temperature down to meet the global goal. So if we were doing this in Fahrenheit, we're looking at getting that Fahrenheit to 3.6 degrees at least, and hopefully striving towards getting that Fahrenheit temperature change to 2100 closer to the 2.6, somewhere between 2.5 and 2.6. So we have interventions we can make in the energy supply. Where are we getting our energy? That's over here on the left. We can make interventions about how we use that energy. What are the end uses? Those growth factors that I already discussed. What about removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through natural means or technological means? And then what about all those other greenhouse gases that are also driving climate change? So this is what you're tasked with today. We're going to work together collectively to build a scenario of success in the next 35 minutes. And we're going to see if we can do it. So the way I want to kick things off is I'd actually love to put my two fellow panelists on the spot to get us started. So is there I'll start with you, Bernadette, is there a climate intervention here, a policy in action that you'd like to see us test out and get us started? Okay, transportation electrification. So we're working here in the Center for End Use. We already talked about in your presentation that transportation is a huge driver in the United States, less so globally. So again, remember, we're in a global model here. And so what would happen if I just swing this very top lever to the right is I would be subsidizing new cars, trucks, SUVs, rail that's out there, subsidizing the purchase price of new electric vehicles on the road. Also subsidizing the creation of the charging infrastructure that is needed, which would happen at a slower delay, because what we've seen, at least to date, is that there's a lag between how much charging infrastructure we really need to kind of bolster the electric vehicle industry. So it's going to phase in a subsidy to make electric vehicles of all types cheaper, and it's also going to it's going to do that over 10 years, and then there's going to be a lag, and it's going to kind of build up that charging infrastructure over 30 years. Before I do that, I want you to test your mental model about what's about to happen. So here we are at 6 degrees Fahrenheit, or 3.3 C of warming at the end of the century. I'm going to go ahead and I'm really going to crank that up. I'm really going to support and encourage that electrification. Ask your mental model what you think is going to happen to that temperature. I'm not going to pull you on it because we might be thinking in different temperature scales, but just think about that for a second, because this is a really important part of the learning process. So then I'm going to swing that lever, we're going to see what happens, and we're going to use En-ROADS to explore what's happening in this complex energy climate system. So here we go, mental model test, cranking it up. I'm going to use the feature here that replays. We can see that we shaved off 1/10 of a degree Fahrenheit. Every 1/10 of a degree, of course, matters. How many people in the room, by show of hands, thought that this would have a greater impact? Most. And did anyone think, was anyone like right on? Yeah, we got some people that were close. All right. So let's talk about why that is, because that's very common. The first time that I saw this, I felt the exact same way. So one of the things that's going on here is that I'm going to blow up this graph for you for a second. Let's repeat that. What you're seeing, nope. Nope, sorry, nope. That added it. Sometimes it just takes over and does whatever it wants to do. So that may have been a hint for later. Let's see that again. So what you're seeing here with the sources of energy is you're seeing a squeeze put on that red block there, seeing it squeeze out oil, because this is a very clear fuel switch. We're going from oil to electricity, but we have to remember that electricity can be made with all sorts of types of energy, not just clean energy. So at first we would probably think, at least my mental model told me, well, if we're really squeezing out oil, then if we drive it and just look at, for example, the growth of renewable energy, clean energy must grow. And it does, that is true. But sometimes what we forget is that all types of energy compete with all other types of energy. So if we're generating the electricity to charge up and run all these cars, then what happens to something like the primary energy demand on coal? Oh, wait, coal also goes up too. We haven't made any changes in the system, at least yet, to kind of clean up that energy grid, right? So that's one of the drivers here. Another driver here is that we have, we're encouraging new electrification, new cars on the road, new trucks on the road, right? And so we can use En-ROADS to explore the difference between the share of new electric transport sales and then the overall share of all the electric transportation out there on the road. And even though these curves look similar, if we look at the graph on the left and we say, okay, how long does it take after we implement this policy to get, say, 30% of all the new vehicles on the road to be electric? And then we can just follow this over with our eyes, and we can see that that's going to take us to about 2034. But how long does it take for 30% of all the vehicles that are out there on the road to be electric? And if we follow that across with our eyes, we're going to see that's not happening till 2043. we have this, what we call capital stock turnover of all the old internal combustion vehicles that are still out there on the road. So that's going to create a delay here. Of course, there's policy measures that could, cash for clunkers program where we take back those ICE vehicles, those internal combustion vehicles. We don't put them back on the road as used cars. We scrap them, we recycle them, and we kind of speed up that process. But that's another thing to also consider here. I'm not going to go through and do this for you, but I want to show you that as an En-ROADS user, you can drill down into any of these policy levers, and you can make more detailed changes, and you can also add policies on top. So for example, if you were like, well, what happens if we don't subsidize new vehicles, but we just subsidize the charging structure? You can put that, that detailed settings on, and it'll allow you to explore those things separately. It'll allow you to say, well, what if we phased out and didn't allow the same percentage of sales of those internal combustion vehicles? You can go in here and you can actually put on a fuel-powered transport sales limit. This is doing road and rail. You can even go in here and explore air and water transportation. So I just want you to see the depths of what's under the hood here and the types of policies you can explore. Now, an important thing to remember with this capital stock turnover and this old infrastructure is, by way of encouraging people to buy electrical vehicles, we're not locking them into a future where the vehicle they just purchased can only be run on fossil fuels for the next 20, 30 years that it ends up on the road. And so there's an important message here that even as we are working to clean up the energy system, making investments that will enable us to use cleaner energy in the future is still very, very important. So that's a great one to get us started with. And maybe that gave Anand some hints about what maybe we might want to do next in the system. So I'm going to click the little home button here. This resets us to the home graphs. I'm going to bring up this graph again. And Anand, is there a policy or intervention here you'd like to see us use?
Sure. Why don't we try and scale up renewables for the electricity and phase out coal more?
Okay, so we'll do both of these. Okay, so so let's be good scientists. We'll do the first one first. We'll just promote more renewables. So here we are with renewable energy, and what we would be doing here with the lever is we would be making it cheaper to start things like wind and solar farms. So we can think of this as a subsidy for those new types of energy. And I can, again, crank this up and go really aggressive on this. I want you to, again, ask your mental model, what is about to happen in this system? We shaved off 1/10 of a degree. What is about to happen in the system? And then I'm going to let it fly. 2 more tenths of a degree, okay? Every 1/10 of a degree matters. Did anyone think that this was a little bit less than maybe they first thought? Not as many people, but some folks. This is for good reason, and it's actually not a terrible reason. So if we look at renewable energy demand in En-ROADS in general, that black line was the baseline. So before we did anything, En-ROADS has a very positive projection in terms of how this would grow in the future, even if we did not do anything more. Why is that? The costs of things like wind and solar have just fallen dramatically around the world. You can explore that in En-ROADS as well. And so we already have a pretty positive baseline there. We're not building on what's happening today. We're building on what we're projecting that's happening in the future. So that's one of the reasons. I can actually use this as an opportunity to show you how we do that model comparison. If we look at the history of, say, the marginal cost of solar electricity, we can see from 1990 to 2023 what happened to the marginal cost, but we can also see something that's really helpful. What did En-ROADS say was going to happen? And then what actually happened according to the International Energy Agency, the International Renewable Energy Association, Lazard, so we can see how much those things tracked. Similarly, and you can explore all of these historical data comparisons. We could look at something like the demand for wind and solar. You can see what did En-ROADS think was going to happen, what actually happened. Pretty good, right? Pretty good job. So that helps us to build confidence and faith in the model. We can go and drill under here as well, and we can do more things to boost this even further. So just for an example, if we went down here, we can look at energy storage, right? The wind's not always blowing, the sun's not always shining. And so we can say, well, what if there was some research and development and it led to some cost breakthroughs with storage? So we could look at hydrogen storage, we could look at other types of storage. We could bring that down another 1/10 of a degree there. So there's always more features hiding underneath. And then a couple of important things to remember here as well. When we think about the capital stock turnover of all those old cars that were on the road, similar things happening here. We are encouraging the thing that we want, but we're not directly discouraging the thing that we don't want, right? So there's going to be a time delay there as well for this to impact coal and natural gas, long-lived infrastructure. Build them, they last 30, 40 years. So we're kind of getting at it in an indirect way. I'm going to give the audience a chance. I want to continue on this, but I'm going to give the audience a chance to see what they want to do here. But another couple of things to think about with this is that we're also making energy even cheaper when we subsidize it, right? So En-ROADS allows us to look at something like the cost of energy, and we can see how we just brought the cost of energy down. And now think for a second to yourself, what happens in your own lives, in your own households when the cost of energy is lower? Ticks up a little bit, right? when the cost of energy is down, we're more likely to use it more often, and vice versa. If it gets more expensive, then we're more likely to conserve a little bit more, make some energy efficiency investments. So those are all important things to consider. Okay, we're going to go to the poll now. So I'm going to switch back to the deck. Thank you to my panelists for getting this kicked off. Let's go from the current slide. And let's see how we did. Come on. Okay. Okay, come on. No. Oh, here we go. You might have to re-vote or just refresh or something like that. Woof. Like, no. I want people online at home to participate as well. Okay, and there's more for me to see here. They're rolling in. Here we go. Okay, so we have right now in the lead is discouraging fossil fuels, followed by pricing carbon. I'm going to write these down so I don't forget. Nope, I got it. So we're going to do fossil fuels, pricing carbon, and we have encouraging, improving energy efficiency. And then we have next up, there's a tie there, but they're all kind of in that agriculture. We just got a bump. Man, you guys, this is why I'm not supposed to reveal it until everyone's voted, but there was a time lag here. Okay, no, improving energy efficiency is still up there. Okay, that gives us a great place to start. So let's go back into the simulator. I'm going to put the home graphs back up here. Here we go. So discouraging fossil fuels. So let's go after a fossil fuel more directly, a single fuel source. And so I'll use Anand's example. So he queued you up, very nice for it. Let's go ahead and do the opposite to coal as we were doing renewables. Let's make the production of coal more expensive. We're at 5.6. What does your mental model tell you is going to happen here with coal? Let's do it. We'll just use the top lever, and I'll tell you what you can do when you drill in. Okay, so we went down 0.3 of a degree this time. Pretty significant. One of the biggest reasons for that, and you can see the brown kind of squishing down there, one of the biggest reasons for that is coal is the most carbon intense of all the fossil fuels. So if you reduce coal, you're going to reduce the most amount of emissions per energy unit that it creates as compared to the other fossil fuels. You do have the ability to do more than just make it more expensive through a regulation or a tax. You can drill in here and you can explore. I'll let you do this on your own. What would it mean to stop new coal infrastructure? What would it mean to reduce the utilization of the current coal infrastructure we have? You can go in here and you can dive deeper and do that. This kind of has the opposite effect of the things that we just talked about, and I won't, to save time, go into it, but we just made energy more expensive, so this is going to drive us to consume a little less, invest in energy efficiency, so we see that price-demand feedback loop in the system. And now we have really put the squeeze on coal the same way we put the squeeze on oil earlier when we electrified, so the same phenomena is going to happen. We put the squeeze on coal renewable energy did grow, but guess what also grew? And you can dig in here, natural gas also grew. All types of energy are going to compete with all different types of energy, but that made a significant contribution. En-ROADS also lets you explore ways that we can multi-solve for other societal challenges while we're trying to solve the climate problem, right? Because we want to make the world a better place while we do this. We don't want to make the world worse off by our efforts. And so, for example, let's look here quickly at the impacts that we just had on air pollution from energy. This is showing you PM 2.5 air pollution. These are the tiniest particulate matters. They're tinier than a strand of my hair in our lungs, in our cardiovascular system, driving asthma, driving millions of deaths worldwide. We just had an almost immediate drop in the number of air pollution that's out there in that form that's so dangerous to humans. So while we're solving this climate problem, this also means a lot for the people who are living near these energy plants or living near highways and byways and are exposed to these various pollutants. So you see a huge drop there. That's also really important to remember in En-ROADS. Okay, so we went after a fossil fuel directly, and we saw this sort of how it kind of expands and it has to go somewhere else. What if we put a price on carbon? We price carbon pollution. This works a little differently. It doesn't say we're going to go after coal or oil or gas or bio. It just says we're going to go after the emissions created by the production of energy. So if you can figure out a way to produce energy from whatever you'd like, but you can do it in a way that's not going to emit these gases into the atmosphere and contribute to climate change, go for it. So I'll go here and you can put in a particular carbon price, so you can drive in here and you can get super, super detailed with your analysis. I'm just going to swing the lever up about halfway. What does your mental model tell you is going to happen? We're at 5.3. Remember, we're trying to get this to somewhere between 2 point. I got to go. Yes. Thank you. Home. Thank you. We do have to go home. Thank you. Audience participation, interactive simulation. I can't do it alone. All right, so what is your mental model going to tell you? That's going to go to that, what's going to happen to that temperature in 2100. Let's crank up the carbon price. Whoa. Okay, let's replay that. I think this is the one I accidentally kicked off earlier. So we see a huge growth in that green area of renewable energy, and we see coal, oil, and gas all shrinking because it's not picking a winner or loser in terms of the fuel source. It's saying how much do you emit, and then you're going to be affected accordingly. The interesting thing that you'll see in En-ROADS is if you drill in and you look at what just happened to coal and to gas. Sorry, not oil, gas. You're going to see that something that just arrived on the scene here, which is this is showing you both the non-electric and electrical uses of both coal and natural gas. And all of a sudden, you see these gray bars show up. For the first time in the simulation, we're actually seeing gas and coal with carbon capture and storage on them. And that's because we've created a strong financial incentive and a strong market signal to tell these companies that if you can make it's worthwhile to make these investments to figure this thing out, because if you can do this in a clean way, you won't be subject to the carbon price. So it is a strong driver of innovation economy-wide. Making some serious progress here. The revenue from the carbon price, you can also drill into En-ROADS and you can look at the revenue, and that's helpful for discussions about what do we do with that revenue. Some policy proposals say give it back to the people in a dividend check. Some policy proposals will say invest that into clean energy technology and climate solutions, a combination of those things, and you can use En-ROADS to explore that as well. So how do we do it in a way that's not going to negatively impact people if we're putting that price on energy? Great, 4.5. Next up, improving energy efficiency. So we're going to go down here. We can do that in both transportations and building and industry. We did transport earlier, so I'll start with buildings and industry. We're going to go back home. Thank you. We're going to go back home, and we're going to crank up energy efficiency in our buildings. So we're still, life in our buildings is the same. We're getting the same amount of light. We're feeling the same level of comfort, right? We're not talking about shutting off the lights and putting on extra sweaters. We're just saying we're gonna be able to do this in a way that's a lot more efficient by making investments in the building's envelope or new, double glass pane windows, new HVAC system, et cetera, et cetera. So ask your mental model. What does your mental model tell you is going to happen to that temperature if we crank up building energy efficiency? Down another 0.3 of a degree. Every 1/10 of a degree matters. Now, this is something to explore in En-ROADS later on your own. If you do this policy early on, when the energy system is still pretty dirty, you're going to see a larger impact than if you've already implemented the policies to clean everything up and then implemented that energy efficiency, right? Because it's decreasing that consumption across the board overall, no matter what the energy grid and makeup looks like. So you get a bigger bang for the climate buck if you do that really early on. Open another tab in En-ROADS, clear all your policy choices, mess around, experiment with this. This is how you learn firsthand. Okay, and then we had, so we had some things around agriculture, deforestation. So over here, we have various drivers of agricultural emissions. And again, you can go in here and you can be really specific and you can explore particular policies, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and crank this lever and greatly reduce that nitrous oxide and that methane that are coming from our agricultural decisions. We're at 4.2F. Mental model. What does our mental model tell us? And now we're down another. So this is very, very significant. As Bernadette was saying earlier, these gases are huge drivers of emissions and are really, really potent when they're in the atmosphere. So it also has a very significant impact here. We are getting there. So what I'm going to have you do now, those were your top 4, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to give me one more vote here. Oh, I didn't start from the slide, so give me 1 second. We're going to push it forward one more time. And then you should be able to see in 1 second a board that looks like the sliders that I'm using. So go ahead and drop a pin, like zoom in, and drop a pin where you'd like me to move the sliders next. And I'm going to go ahead and show the responses. Okay, lots of things for deforestation and nature-based solutions. Those are kind of in the lead, and maybe even increasing more energy efficiency. Great. And thank you for everyone that's participating here and at home. So let's go ahead and decrease deforestation. This in En-ROADS at that top lever, it's going to decrease both complete deforestation, permanently changing land from being forested to another use, and it's also going to reduce forest degradation when we're degrading it because we're harvesting for wood products or bioenergy of that nature. You can drill into the details and you can get really specific. Let's crank this up. What does your mental model tell you is going to happen? Another 1/10 of a degree. The opposite is going to happen here if we are going to be planting trees. So if we're going to do nature-based solutions, we can look at both planting trees and doing agricultural soil carbon sequestration. So we can crank that up as well. We've gotten the temperature down to 3.4, so we're at the upper end of that global goal. So in 35 minutes in a simulated environment, we've pieced together one policy pathway that can get the world there. And so congratulations that we actually pulled that off. And of course, you can explore and you can get this down even further. But what are we seeing here? There is not a silver bullet solution. There's not one policy where if we just go hard on this, then everything else will fall into place, right? It's going to take many seeds to plant that garden. It is still physically and technologically possible. We didn't even mess with technological carbon removal. We didn't even have a breakthrough happen in nuclear fusion. We did it with all the technology we have today. Okay, there are definitely, you saw it, there are policies that are higher leverage for the temperature and lower leverage, but there's policies where even their lower leverage have other multi-solving benefits and help us to address other societal challenges. So there's lots of options to do that along the way. Every successful scenario in En-ROADS, and come up with your own, you're going to see a dramatic reduction in the amount of coal, oil, and gas that we use over the next 10 years. So let me wrap by showing you briefly the world that we just created together, much better world than where we were projected to be headed if we didn't do anything more. So let's look at some impacts. For example, let's look at what happened in the world because of what we did in terms of outdoor labor losses from extreme heat. So these are people who have, they're in construction, they're working on farms. I come from a huge family of firefighters. This is super important to me. Huge reductions in the loss of labor losses in that sector. We can look at how extreme heat has impacted deaths by extreme heat with regions around the world. So we can look and see how, yes, there are parts of the world that are disproportionately affected by deaths from extreme heat, but no one is safe. We're already seeing these deaths. Look where we were headed in black, and look how much we were able to reduce the deaths around the world from extreme heat because of what we just did. We can look at, we've already looked at air pollution. That was really good. A huge decrease there. We can look at crop yield. So if you're representing a very agricultural district, large reductions in here and how much we would have lost from warming with our staple crops. We can look at global GDP loss. Where were we headed in terms of GDP loss because of all of the impacts of climate change? If we left it unchecked, all the floods, all the fires, all the wildfires, all the pests, all the disease, all the deaths, that cost the world's economy. And so we were able to greatly reduce the GDP that's lost. We do assume there's economic damage from climate change. You can go into the simulator and you can change the damage functions and you can really explore that in depth. We also have some really cool maps, and one of them is a partnership with Climate Central. So let's see if I can pull one of these up. This one usually takes a little bit more of a second to load, but it's worth it if it comes up. So we can look at what happened to the risk of land that was at risk from flooding from sea level rise because of the policy interventions we made. Let's zoom in at Miami Beach. All of the green was formerly blue when we got started. We have changed it to green through our policy interventions. We have saved all of this land and the people that live there and the commerce that's there from flooding from sea level rise, and you can explore what happens with in different years. You can explore storm surge. And we have brand new maps on things like extreme heat and humidity. So let's do this. Where it's extremely hot and humid sometimes, if you live here like I do. Let's zoom into Washington, D.C., and we can switch this from the baseline where we were at with 15 to 28 days, this high wet bulb temperature, really, really hard for humans to sweat and cool properly. We can switch that and see what we've done. We've halved the number of days where we would be suffering in that way, right here in the District of Columbia. So you can use these various maps. We have them also for wildfire danger days. You can really drill in and look at how this is impacting folks in your district. So it's not going to be easy, we just pulled these levers in a simulated environment, right? You guys all have to do the work out there to get it done. So it's not gonna be easy. It's gonna be worth it. I think I have one more final poll for you. Let's see. Oh, nope. Nope. Not going to do it from the beginning. Not going to do that to you. I'm curious to know if this was helpful to you in any way. So let me know if you think that after today, what you saw is going to help you. Did you gain any insights in the room today that are going to help you in your work? Are you interested in taking a deeper dive in the simulator on your own? I am here to help you do that. Our team is here to help you. Would you like to organize an En-ROADS workshop for your colleagues, for your constituents? And there's probably other things I'm not even thinking of that you can use case, so I'd love to talk to you afterwards and see what those things might be. Great to see that some of this is relevant and helpful, and happy to continue that conversation with you. I'll close with this final slide. This is how you find us. This is how you find me. This is how you keep in touch. Thank you so much for participating today. Okay, I'll leave it just in case.
Very cool, Krystal. Thank you so much. Krystal's going to take her seat up here. Bernadette and Anand will do the same thing. We have some questions, I bet, in the room. I'm curious what the other 4% was about what people will do after this. I'm curious what that would be. But anyway, I'm going to start with a question while I keep an eye out. And Reneem has our microphone, so she'll come find you if you raise your hand. So this is great. This is a fantastic set of presentations. Bernadette, maybe we should start with you because of your background. How do we communicate this? This is fairly technical stuff. And I actually thought that those levers meant that that was going to be the future. I didn't realize there was actually work to do. I thought that was part of En-ROADS. But okay, so now we have all this work to do. So how do we communicate all of this? How do we, this is complicated. Bernadette and I were talking a little bit. This is complicated stuff, right? These are complicated interactions, not just from a scientific perspective, but in terms of like how markets work together and things like that. But from a science communications perspective, do you have any advice for the congressional staff here about how to talk about this in a way that will resonate with their constituents or with their colleagues?
Absolutely. So, is on right?
It is
There we go. Okay. So absolutely, I have lots of ideas. I'll summarize it. So we won't go on forever, and I'm happy to engage after. Also, so a lot of our work is with media and local media. So there's a lot of similarities in how you talk to local constituents and local media, right? Their audiences. And the first I'd always say is know your audience. That's why I started with those first couple of slides. The people actually want to engage in this topic. The thing is, even if they come at you with, oh, well, how do we know? It's because they want to know. So they know something's happening. They don't always know what that means for them and what they can do. So the first thing is know your audience. Meet them where they are. As we showed, everything is sadly affected by this. So there's something they care about, that you care about, that has a climate connection. That's how you get in and you engage. We always focus on these polar opposites in the world right now, but there's so much that brings us together. And so you can start with meeting people where they are. Next, I'd say personalize and localize, especially when you're talking to local constituents, whether it is a coastal flooding issue or whether it's extreme heat. Everyone really is extreme heat anymore, some form or another, or whether it's farming or whatever it might be. Connect with them on a personal, local level, and there's data and information really to support that, and a lot of agencies can help you too. And then don't be afraid. Public opinion is on your side. Science is on your side. There's a lot of really good information to dig in on, and that's where I would say is actually engaging in this issue is one of the first things that people can do more of, and that's how we get to building our understanding and moving forward on our solutions.
Anand, over to you. What are some of the gaps that we are facing in communications, and how can we overcome those?
Yeah, I want to just emphasize what Bernadette said about personalize and localize. And I think that's as true for climate as it is true for action. So if you think of action, I think people understand prices, they understand cost of living, they see what's happening with energy, they see what's happening with transportation. So these are not these are not abstractions. These can be made very real and tangible. And I think if we do that, you will find that there is actually a lot of support for many of the actions that we move the levers on, right? Because it makes a difference. It makes lives better. When we weatherize a home, it's not just reducing energy efficiency in abstract terms, but it's actually making the home more livable. It's improving comfort. So I think that whole translation of what these policy levers mean, which might seem very abstract, into what actually is a difference in the lives, day-to-day lives. I think if you make that connection, you'll find there's a lot of support for many actions that we see.
Thanks. And Krystal, over to you. I'm curious, this is obviously not your first time making these sorts of presentations. What have you learned from your experience about how to best communicate this that you maybe didn't expect to, or maybe you didn't know at first? What are your lessons in terms of how we communicate this? Your mic, sorry.
I think just how important it is to give people the opportunity to have hands-on experiences and learn for themselves and really be open to having people challenge you. We built the simulator and made it really transparent and gave people flexibility because we wanted to welcome people to question things. I mean, that's what science is about, right? Questioning ourselves and looking at the best available data. And so our senior scientist, I'm going to quote him, he often says, research shows that showing people research doesn't work. So if we're only talking to them in a kind of unidirectional, I have all this information, I'm the expert, this is what you need to know, now go do something differently, that's only going to get us so far. And so creating these opportunities for people to really get their hands dirty, figuratively speaking, with something like this tool and other tools that are out there. There's many tools that Bernadette showed earlier today that allow you to really explore for yourself. I think that that's a really important piece of communication.
Great, thanks. I'm looking for questions in the audience. If you have one, please raise your hand. And we're keeping an eye on the online audience questions as well. Curious, maybe Anand, maybe we'll start with you for this one, but what do you see coming down the road in terms of science policy and specifically for the congressional staff and our audience today? Are there things that you are sort of tracking that, when they happen or when a report is released or whatever, will increase or improve our understanding of some of the issues that we've talked about today?
Thanks. So there's a couple of things coming up. So a lot of the data that I showed was from the IPCC. And the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we're now starting off its next assessment cycle. And in a few weeks, governments will be meeting together in China to approve the outlines of the reports. And that's actually a key step in the process, because once the report outlines are approved is actually where the writing work can start. And the hope is that the next assessment cycle will really play an important role for the next global stock take. So we'll see how that plays out. And of course, COP30 coming up in Brazil is of course, a key moment for many things.
Great. Krystal, I'll ask you the same question. Are there things coming down the line that you're tracking that will help sort of improve all of this and make it better and more accessible and more informed?
Sure. So, there's more than one way for us to use our tools. And so we've been thinking a lot about where is there still interest in climate action at the federal level, and ways that we can use our tool to really dive into some of the assumptions under things like nuclear energy, nuclear fusion, carbon capture and storage, afforestation. So we want to still explore those solutions with where people are interested and help them understand, like, what are the drivers that we could create policy that could maybe change some of these underlying assumptions, speed up some of these technologies, but then also just let the science say what the science says and the data fall where the data falls, and kind of approach it that way instead of necessarily saying, let's make it from now to the end of the session, let's get this temperature down to the global goal. It's like, what are the policies that you are interested in working on, and we will work with you to explore those in depth.
Mm-hmm. And Bernadette, I'll ask you the same question.
Sure, so I'm going to answer it in two ways. First, sadly, we know there's going to be more extreme weather events. And all that work got us to just below 2. We're at 1.3, and we're seeing what's happening already. So let's be realistic about that. We have a lot of work to do. As you said, the thing is, we know what we need to do, and a lot of these actions are already happening. We just need to accelerate them, because living in a world above 2C is going to be really hard to handle with limited adaptation. And the goal is really to keep people safe and prepared. So we know these events are going to keep coming. So what can we keep doing to bring down our future warming, because every 10th does really matter, while also keeping the current people safe and prepared with the warming we already have? So that's one thing. We talked a lot about technology and technological and big systems change, which is critical. But one of the things that's missing in solutions is communication and having conversations. That is a solution, building it into our conversations and our education and helping people understand. And I'm not saying it's just an education gap, that's not what I'm saying, but it's not always the right information at the right places at the right time in the right ways. It is complex at times, and if we just go at that level, you're going to lose a lot of people in this process. So how do we break that down? How do we simplify? How do we have conversations about this that actually matter and can help people stay safe and prepared? Because that's really the goal.
Yeah. I always think about that when people are like, well, why are we doing this? It's for the future. Well, also it's for us. Like, I know what a wet bulb temperature is. I don't really want to live in a 6 degrees Fahrenheit warmer planet. It's unpleasant and everything else. So that's great. I'm looking around for a final question. I see a lot of people working up the courage to ask a question. If they don't have one, I think I'll just ask a final, I'll offer all of our panelists an opportunity to have a final word. Krystal, perhaps we could start with you, and then we could hear from Bernadette, and we can end with Anand. Final word for our congressional staff today?
Final word, I'd love you to, if you're interested in engaging with MIT's Climate Policy Center, we are here to help. And again, as I said, nonpartisan. We will work with anyone who wants to have a serious conversation about climate. We have researchers that are able to help you answer any kind of burning questions that you have and do that in a timely manner. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'd love to work with you.
Great, thanks. Bernadette, last word?
I would say we can do this, we really can. And I want to leave people with that capacity. And so that, to your point too, there's a lot of us out here who are willing to help, who come at it really from the scientific perspective, and it's not from from our side, it's not even from a policy perspective, and it's not from an advocacy or a partisan perspective. It's really what the science is showing us. One of the areas we're digging extra deep, if you want to go, is even the coastal flooding and all of the information in that tool. We're going to be updating it this year, in addition to a lot that we're doing with attribution science. I don't know who followed, but we just worked with, well, we didn't work on this specific report, but we worked with World Weather Attribution, and there was a report just came out yesterday quantifying the role of climate change and the wildfires that just happened in California. There's a lot of work being done on that quantification and really showing the climate change fingerprint in these events already. And so if you want to dig deeper into that, we've got a lot of information.
Great, thanks. And Anand, I think that means you get the last word today.
Risky. But yeah, so really it's just two things. One is, as Bernadette said, we've got to not just reduce emissions. We really have to anticipate and prepare for a warmer world, because we are in a warmer world already, right? And so it's not about 2050, it's not about 2100, it's about now. And that leads me to my final point, which is, I think, as in so many things, early action is really critical. Early action saves money, saves lives, and the more you can avoid today and prepare today, the better it is for tomorrow. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. I think our panelists deserve a round of applause. Thank you so much for being with us today. This was a great panel. We have a lot of other great resources as well. And so as you're doing your work, if you're new to these issues, if you're new to the Hill, if you're new to policy, if you're new to climate, whatever, visit us online at www.eesi.org. Take full advantage of everything that we do. There's a bunch of materials out on the front table. Take those. Sign up for the newsletter, Climate Change Solutions. Comes out every 2 weeks. And check out some of the other briefings. I mentioned a few of our other briefings, but about a year ago in this very room, we had one that also featured some Climate Central resources. Representative Sorensen joined us in person for that. He's a former
He's a former broadcaster.
Yeah, I was going to say, are you ever a former meteorologist, or are you just
No,
a
you're always a
who does something
meteorologist,
different?
but you're a former broadcaster.
Very, very cool. We also have a lot of great briefings coming up in the future. So we will be back here in a couple weeks to learn about the budget and appropriations and reconciliation process. That will be a really good briefing. We will also be back learning about surface transportation and infrastructure and all sorts of great additional topics. Those are our in-person briefings. We're also doing online briefings every couple weeks. We're looking at different river systems around the country, and we just did one on the Columbia River. We've got one coming up on the Colorado River. We looked at the Tennessee River, Mississippi River, lots of river systems. Really cool briefings. Lots of people from their communities joining us online to help us learn about the challenges, the resilience challenges that those communities are facing. I'd also, before I get into, or as I start my thank yous, I'd just like to remind everyone that a bunch of us are wearing our lapel pins. That means we work for EESI. If you have questions or if you want more information, find one of us. We'd be happy to chat with you as well. Big thanks to Representative Tonko for helping us with the room today. It always helps to have a really great room. I'd like to say thanks to my colleagues Dan O and Omri and Allison and Anna and Molly and Nicole and Hannah for all of their hard work. This is also the first briefing of our year where we have a full roster of interns. So Raneem and Hadley and Whitney, thank you for being with us today and for being great interns. Our videographer, Troy, in the back of the room. Thank you, Troy. We couldn't do it without you. We'll go ahead and end it there. Sorry for starting a couple minutes late. We ran a couple minutes late, but what are you going to do? I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your Wednesday. Here's our survey link. We read every response if you have a minute or two. We really appreciate that. And we better see you all back here in 2 weeks to learn about the budget and appropriations process, because that is something tells me we're all going to need to learn a lot more about. So with that, thanks everyone. Have a great day.